Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Rangiku, Sui-Fong and FemKurama. Part 3. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Saw swallowed by a giant snake, whole. Not pleasant, still being processed down the gullet of the damn thing. Is my luck a spectrum of good and bad? On one hand, I am being eaten, very bad luck. On the other hand, the snake is going to get a bad surprise as well. Naruto was a bit salty, you know, being swallowed by a freaking snake. Will do that to you. But that wasn't so bad, not when you could make clones. Naruto brought his hands together for such a thing, intending to burst out with an overwhelming amount of Kage Bushin. Before he molded the chakra to do so, however, another idea wormed its way into the young lad's mind. Outside the snake, the large purple constrictor itself was enjoying its meal, happy to please its master. It was slithering along the forest floor, letting the scarlet trench coat full slip further down its throat when it felt something begin to reverberate within. Strange, it was almost as if the boy was laughing like a mad. Hiss. It curled up in pain as a hot searing feeling wretched at its gullet. How was such pain possible? It felt as though several large spears were clamping down on its inside, tearing about its inner walled muscles, crunching the nerves without fail. Blood began pouring out of its fanged mouth, spattering the ground crimson, staining the greenery of the place. Its skin felt so dry then, even as the pain increased. No, it wasn't even its scales and soft flesh beneath, everything was drier than a bone. Its sharp eyes felt like they were going to burst into sand. From nose to tail, it was as if a sun was burning all the liquid in it, shriveling it into the husk of a once great beast. With all color gone and blood drained, left with nothing, it finally felt its very soul get sucked into that of infinite darkness, to never be any more. From the adust form of the now dead and gone snake emerged Naruto, completely unscathed. Woo. You were quite a meal, my purple fellow. Not too much of a fight if I'm on the inside, however, that's disappointing. Oh well, you'll find the miasma of void darkness more accommodated now that you have company in there. Now to find the Sonova bitch who sicked you on me. Naruto felt around and found two familiar Ryuko near and one he did not. Oh, Naruto thought, that one's strong. He turned towards them and flash stepped, a damn grin about splitting his face. It did not take him long to find them, the snake not getting too far when he was eaten. When he arrived, a tree's arm above them, his teammates were surprised. Naruto. They yelled. BFT, you think a hardy fellow like me's gonna die jet and eaten? He yelled back down, smiling like a Cheshire. He turned his head to the man who had stronger Ryuko and probably chakra than the two below. He began reaching for his Zanpakuto. Naruto whipped the blade down, pulled the trigger, and swung up, extending the blade. Ring can be filled, Hacho Omimashita. Blast my enemies to vapor, Dejina Hito. The blonde Jinchuriki bellowed out for all to hear. Without a second thought, he flashed out in a burst of speed, swiping his blade across the skinny frame of the man. Red shot out from the slash as the body was sent through the air like a rocket, its back hitting the tree's main branch with a thud. Naruto had to blink. Once. Twice. Thrice. Oh goddammit. I thought he was able to dodge that. Naruto's indignant shout reached the two behind him, confusing them. They did not know he wanted a good fight and so did not understand his frustration. But, before the young lad could go off on a rant, the fallen form of the man he slashed twitched. Naruto noticed and held his blade at the ready. A person burst out of the body, one just as skinny, his long black hair obscuring his face. The man stepped out of the body, a tan tunic and dull-colored shorts tied by a large purple rope. The man lifted his head, revealing golden slitted eyes and a pointed face full of sinister desire. Ha 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 ha, do you know who I am, dear boy? I am Orochimaru of the former Sannin, a tittle equivalent with a Hokage. Ha 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 ha, oh my, you are the first to get the drop on me like that in a long while, dear boy. More maniacal laughter echoed out the man's throat, a hollow sound to it, void of feeling. So? Naruto responded with deadpan. Yes, that's right, a Sannin who what? Orochimaru was a bit stunned that the boy was not surprised like his fellows behind him. Okay, then if you're telling the truth, then I guess I release. Naruto told, his face falling on that of a stern hardness. Beeping a brow, Orochimaru asked what he meant by those words. It means I will hold no chakra or Raishi back, it means that I will not restrict myself or any of my abilities. This is your only warning. The snake-like man only grew a large grin, a hand on his hip. Ah ha 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 ha. So you're going to use everything against me. You won't be able to do anything, boy. His evil laughter heightened then, as if it was the funniest prospect he had ever heard. Naruto ignored him, waving his teammates to leave, to get as far away as they could. You asked for it. With his other hand, he reached inside his crimson trench coat, grabbing something beneath the folds of darkness. What, a kunai or perhaps Lu of shuriken, maybe even senbon, heh. Orochimaru felt his laughter fall short when, as Naruto pulled it out, presented a strange weapon. Was it that even? It looked like a hunk of hollow iron, wrapped in old oaken wood. It had a trigger and hammer on the top near the stock-like piece, as if it were like a crossbow minus the bow. It had a wide brim at the end, like a funnel. He watched Naruto rest that saw cleaver on his shoulder and point that strange contraption at him. My Hacho Omimashita can use the density of my Raishi, slinging it out as a sharp slash of energy reaching far, but it lacks that initial power once it gets so far out. Naruto told, adjusting the saw cleaver on his shoulder. But, for sacrificing that great distance, my other Zanpakuto takes that Raishi in a small bundle, condensing it, and when it is fired, shoots out like shot. Although it lacks reach, it makes up for it with the sheer power it keeps for that shorter distance. He went on, as Orochimaru began to bepize the boy's words. That is the meaning behind my Dejina Hito, to blast my enemies to vapor, is its power. Here he paused, lifting the barrel higher to line up with the snake man's face. But to make those attacks stronger, I must know the names, and incidentally, I do. He breathed in deep and pulled the trigger. Urasudo. A vicious stream of Reiatsu snapped out like thick lightning, speeding towards Orochimaru so fast he could barely snap his body out of the way, the searing burn of its force taking the digits on one of his hands. A barking gasp was given when he fell to a lower branch, unprepared for what occurred. It was not usual for someone to be able to do this to him, to catch him off guard so blatantly. If only he knew what that damned contraption was beforehand, what it could do, maybe he would have saved his fingers. But, oh well, he knew now. The pale-skinned snake man rose from his slumped perch, face dragging against the sky as a grin split his face. How long had it been since his heart beat with a tinge of fear? How long was it ago that he was actually enjoying his time in a fight such as this? No, he longed for this fight, the rush of chakra and blood sending his brain in a haywire of joy. Now, he had no intentions of dying, by no means would he fight to his last breath on this, providing the boy could drive him away, but it had been since a long time coming that he could at least stretch himself in a good fight. Naruto was looking down at him, his expression stoic, stern, hard and cold, void of joy. What was wrong? Wasn't he the kind to get excited for things like this? Shouldn't he be fighting with a damn grin plastered on his face and a maddened chortle behind his gullet? But then he remembered, the runts, they sped away even further, the Sharingan ever slipping. He was concerned for them, that he was too powerful. Damn, he really needed that for his research. Then again, looking at Naruto and the fight he could give, perhaps a new vessel was not to be found in an Uchiha, but maybe in this young Uzumaki. Naruto lifted his saw cleaver, slashing down. Suda Sarasa. Came his graveled voice as a torrent of red came slashing down. Orochimaru used Kimawari, glancing away just in time, that miasma of slashing crimson still pierced through the bark and wood, biting deep even into the ground. The tree was struck at the base, the roots cleaved, and so it began to fall with its limbs, a great creak of timber as it crashed down and across the forest floor. Naruto leapt off, gathering Reiatsu under his feet, staying in the air. Such a neat trick. Naruto-kun, what kind of ninjutsu is that? I must know. Orochimaru yelled from below, grinning madly. No chakra, spiritual power only. Now please, die. Naruto told, swinging out another slash of Reiatsu. Orochimaru dodged, speeding away on the treetops. But the Shunpo, he got close enough and shot out 3 Burasudo, yet the man had just only evaded, throwing kunai too close for the blonde to dodge. They sunk in, but he shook them off, finally settling for a glare, waiting for his next move against the snake man. Afraid can't do that, the pale man sang back to Naruto. He let the scorched palm of his hand sprout fingers once more and, biting his thumb a moment later, slapping his hands against the tree trunk. Orochimaru felt the familiar rush of air as he was risen above the tree tops, the heavy gushes of smoke burling out like volcanic dust spewed from its depths of fire. The smoke rolled away and Naruto bide his statement before about snakes. By far, this one was far larger, like a chimera, a kaiju of epic proportions. A single eye was several times bigger than his head and the fangs beneath were at least as long as he was tall. A frightening beast, a sinister purple veil of scales wrapping its enormous form. Arms crossed, Orochimaru waited for the boy's reaction, a grin on his face. Naruto's expression didn't change, instead, he let his Hacho Omimashita be sheathed and wrapped, he even put his Dejina Hito, that blunderbuss-like weapon, up in his trench coat. Confused, Orochimaru wondered if the boy was throwing in the towel after seeing his summon. He was severely misled. Naruto lifted his hands up, forming a box with his digits over his right eye. That orb of blue crawled and swarmed scarlet, the pupil splitting just like the other. His lips split to speak, those horrid razors seeming to rent the air as he drew breath. And then, all hell broke loose. Edo Saishin Kai. But those terrible and great words crashing down against the sky, coming out in a howl of torrid words, a black mass exploded from underneath the crimson trench coat, covering the lad completely like thick hot tar, bubbling and writhing in what looked like agony, the forms of beast and man twisting beneath in great torment. The black miasma shot up and out, seething from what sounded like thousands of lost souls, wailing from a mesh of entwined cries, all screaming out horrid rasps, as if they came from hell itself. It morphed, twisting in and around itself, forming the enormous head of a fox, having several eyes lines and atop one another in splittingly deadly glare of angry red, pinioning not just Orochimaru, but the kaiju snake he stood upon too, unable to move, amidst the madness that had found form, just one of its large gnawing fangs larger than Orochimaru was tall. A single eye larger than one of those huge shurikens. The whole of its body was also fox-like, yet only pertaining a single tail. It howled out those thousands of wailing cries, shooting a chill down both of its enemies' spines. It bounded after them. Black paws struck the air as it sprinted, crashing into the giant snake, knocking it down from its high perch. The beast didn't wait for even a single purple scale to touch the ground before it began grappling with the enormous snake, jaws clenching over taut muscle and hardened skin. Razor teeth sunk deep, blood beginning to pour out like a gush from a geyser. The snake hissed out as it felt a fiery pain wrench its lungs. Orochimaru dared not leave Manda to the beast, knowing he would have just as much luck as his summon, and instead formed the hand signs. He leaped from his perch, fingers formed into a rigid claw as lightning arced between his digits, sparking about with fury. That lightning release met true to the beast's temple, the chakra element slipping between its mountainous flesh, burning and charring what was already black as pitch. It released its stranglehold to the snake, swiping out at the man instead. With a shunshin, the pale man dodged, once more atop his summon. He commanded and it swung out its mighty jaws, snapping over the beast's neck, wrenching and curling over its form. The burn from its earlier assault however left it weaker, and the beast twisted about, snapping its fangs back into the flesh of the snake. They gripped each other in that deathly grapple for a minute, the great breath of both chimera although like that of gusting gales was beginning to come out shorter and shorter, as they felt their air slowly chop up and slow to dull gasps. Orochimaru could not necessarily help his summon, trying to use any ninjutsu attack would harm his snake who was a very useful tool in the first place and so opted to wait as death seemed to encroach upon the two. Dark and scarlet slitted eyes began to loosen, the two and many orbs of the death machines beginning to fall. Out of some last resort, the fox-like beast twisted its head, renting the large summoned scales and flesh, forcing it to relinquish its hold as scarlet erupted from its side. A hiss of pain erupted from it, although finally free itself, and fell back, sprawled out before poofing away from its summoner. The black abyss that the fox had been suddenly unraveled itself from the outside to in, both creatures' sudden disappearance, leaving the ground for a good few miles bare, trodden and scarred from the great beast's tumble. All that was left were the two figures, a ghostly white with purple contrasted by the harsh crimson and black. Naruto had the worst of it, his clothes all torn, threadbare and nearly gone. His skin was gnarled and scratched, gashes lining his entire form. They stared each other down however, slitted scarlet glaring down at a baleful golden, both waiting for the other to make a move. Naruto reached for his Hacho Omimashita, already saying the words. Suda. Surasa. His voice cracked out like a whip, rough as a graveled road. What came of it was a slow, pitiful streak of pale crimson, easily dodged by the snake man. In the end of that attack, Naruto fell to his knees, his legs no longer able to support him, buckled beneath his injuries, his lack of Ryatsu leaving him bare of regeneration. He was all helpless and out of breath. Ha 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 ha, a hearty laugh broke the silence between them, coming from the pale snake man, as his feet drew him closer to the fallen young blonde who fought so valiantly. Can your strength not gather, boy? Isn't there one more feat of power within you? Come now. Shout at me, scream bloody murder and wrap yourself in that reishi. Is that not what the heroes do? His shout trilled, a chuckle of triumph behind it. No response. Orochimaru frowned, expecting another round out of the boy, but was disappointed as he fell on his face, a sharp smack of bone and skin against the earth. Instead of killing him, he saw that same potential for a vessel that he saw in Sasuke Nonthelis, tossing him a heaven scroll. If he was to have Naruto at his toughest, he'd have to get him into the rest of the Chunin exams, knowing he'd pass and get tougher missions, strengthening him until Orochimaru decided to use him. He turned away, not giving him the curse mark who knew how it would affect the lad with that strange energy, it only being tested with only chakra and left. Naruto heard the subtle sound of a shunshin, and finally relaxed. He let his body begin to absorb any surrounding Ryatsu, as to allow his regeneration. He'd rather not let the man notice him getting back up and kill him as he did so, the process not very fast in the first place. It took some time to add the spiritual particles to his own Ryuko, but it did the job, restoring him to at least a quarter of strength. It was far more than enough to stand and get to the tower, far more than enough to get home. Sasuke and Sakura were at his sides, helping the larger teammate to his feet. When he was securely on the ground, after stumbling a bit, he finally let his taxed body relax. He placed his saw cleaver on his back, its wraps sheathing the Zanpakuto completely to him. The blonde breathed in and breathed out, sore as sore could be, the majority of his wounds sealed over, the more tedious and harmful ones getting there. "Thanks guys," he told, picking up the heaven scroll. He grabbed them too and used Shunpo, flash stepping to the tower guarded from the creatures that abound the forest around it. He arrived minutes later, finding them to be the first there. They found out that they could now open the scrolls, and doing so found out that, once more, through a summon Iruka, that they would have yet another test. Later, Naruto and the rest stood atop cement walks, guardrails keeping them bordered against the arena below. Off to the side and below, the Hokage and a few others stood, ready to watch the preliminary rounds. The blonde was a bit angry however, because they would have another bout of fights after that, the actual last and final test, and only then could they pass. So many steps. He watched in silent patience however, as the fights went on, the digital board often set to the sidewall, telling who would be fighting who. Choji fought a guy from Sound, Shikamaru did the same, Sakura and Ino fought with much gusto to Naruto's amusement resulting in Sakura winning. All the fights were very good, and some were inspiring, such as when Sasuke battles a guy from Sound, just as well winning the bout with a copied move from Lee. All the fights were good, well fought, but it was when that Lee fellow went against Gaara that really took the cake. He was using weights, and when he finally took them off, was faster than Naruto could have ever anticipated. Faster than most I could follow except Naruto, Jiji and the Jonins, they could just about see it coming. Even with all those tricks up his sleeves and ankles Gaara-san finally caught him. Naruto watched as the boy's arm and leg were about to be crushed. Suda Surasa. Red slashed the sand and twine, nearly taking the Taijutsu user's limbs off anyway, making the ground shudder and the cement boardwalks to shake with the power. Naruto quickly used Shunpo, flash stepping down to Lee and back up to the rest of his team. When the boy was safe, he pointed down towards Gaara of the desert. "Hey. This is only a preliminary. Crushing someone's bones here is excessive, at least wait till the actual bouts." He bellowed, eyes flashing scarlet, seething with fury. He may not know Lee well, but he couldn't watch the boy suffer, he didn't deserve that after putting in so much effort. Gaara, however aloof he was, showed some emotion. The glint of madness glared back up at Naruto. "You wanna fight boy?" Naruto yelled. Sand wafted around like a blanket, swaying much like a snake ready to strike. Naruto lifted his arm high, ready to slash away the boy below. "Suda." Sir, his words were halted by a single strong hand grabbing his arm. This time, his eyes stayed crimson slits as he glared back at whoever dared stop him. He was a slight surprise to find an older-looking Lee, with somehow bushier brows. "This is not very youthful. I thank you for assisting my student and keeping from getting his bones broken. But, please leave." Guy bellowed, not truly angry, more stoic than anything despite his strange way of speaking. Naruto's arms was released, and he looked at Jiji. "I'm sorry, Naruto, but," stopping about to attack another genin without being in the fight. "I'm sorry Jiji, I know I'm disqualified." His voice was somehow even and calm. "I will leave, because you told me so, forgive me for almost causing a larger problem." He turned and began to walk away, the whole of the place silent as the grave itself, as if a single word uttered was to be for death's opening strike. He passed Hinata, her brows knit in concern for him, but he did not say a word to her. But when he came to Kiba's side, he spoke quickly and quietly. "Hey, make sure she wins her fight, inspire her man, she needs it. And you best not lose either." He told, his expression blank, without rancor or emotion. When he passed his teammates, when everyone was behind him and he was about to exit, he threw back one thing for them all to hear. "No Haruki 9. Go kick some ass." These words were filled with rancor. These words were for them, his teammates, his village's fellow ninja, to hear, to inspire them with the ferocity of the very roughness of his voice. And yet as swiftly as he shouted those words, he left, leaving them numb. He left without a fight, despite carrying his team so close to victory, he left with no argument. He gave up getting closer to Hokage, just so his team would not suffer from his decision, he left to inspire them all. Naruto arrived back home, just before the door, his heart heavy. He had to do what he had done, otherwise, fighting outside the rules might have resulted in war, and he didn't want that. Why would he? Even if they had allowed him to stay, the village of Sand would despise Konoha for allowing an exception to the rule, and it would have cost them dearly. So, by giving up a step towards becoming Hokage, giving a piece of his dream up for the welfare of everyone, he was brought back to square one, even if he was doing something good in his heart. He knew Lee worked hard, having no chakra, and felt like he and Lee were similar. They both had to claw and scrape for the strength they had, they both had a few people who cared for them to help them in that aspect. So, to see Lee, someone in a similar circumstance, have his dream of being a great ninja be crushed like his arm and leg would be the same if he were to be crippled just the same. Sacrifice, Naruto reminded himself, that's what makes a great ninja, sacrificing one's own dream for the sake of another's. When he finally put his hand to the handle, turning the piece of metal, he came to the sight that crushed him. Rangiku was atop Sui-Fong, both were against one another, throwing themselves at each other, oblivious to the young lad. Naruto felt his chest become hollow-like, empty, as he stared on, his eyes becoming hard steel. Creak went the floor beneath his feet, snapping the two women's attention from one another to him. For a moment, no one said a word, all was unmoving, all was but a silent world against the hand of a shushing god. Then, he the blonde lad with all his stoicness ran his thumb across his parted razor fangs, flicking a droplet into the petite woman's mouth, hung ajar from the surprise. She gagged when it hit her throat, swallowing it without thought. Your ribs seem fine now, I release you, familiar. He turned away, stepping out of the apartment. He didn't even slam the door, he just shut it almost quietly. Had that really been Naruto? How? My god. How could someone with so much life and vibrance walk in, like a ghost, a silent wraith? How could someone with such passion have such a dead voice? The grave built from his gullet, it seemed, as if much of those words came from dead lips not meant to speak, tongue from that of an ancient sorrow. How could he be a silent dead when he was filled with so much life? Rangiku snapped out of it, nearly tripping over her own rushing feet, so much fear tolling the bell of dread in her heart. She nearly ripped the door from its very hinges when she got to it, her eyes wide like a doe caught in headlights as she tried to look for her Naruto. He was nowhere in sight. She was about to go and try to explain to him what she planned, she was going to show that she loved him more than he knew, that she'd be willing to make him happier. But it backfired, her idea of getting him there with her, and Sui-Fong drove him away. Why didn't she say anything? Maybe then he would not have flown away on those swift flash-stepping feet. Anger for her own stupidity made her knuckles white, tears beginning to form. Was all that effort, all the training, and getting to know each other, for nothing but broken-hearted people, such as them? Couldn't she just explain to him what her intentions were? She was sure he would understand and Rangiku-san, you're bleeding. Sui-Fong came behind her, pulling her back into the apartment. The orange-haired lass felt her teary gaze fall to her scarlet dripping palms. Was she so furious with herself that she did this? But, even as Sui-Fong began cleaning them and wrapping them, she found she didn't care if they bled out or not, all she wanted to do was find Naruto. I know why now, I see why you love him. The captain told, eyes focused on dressing the self-inflicted wound. Most men would have jumped at such an opportunity, but he did not. He left, cheated on. He didn't even say anything against it, he just left. I see now why you love that young man. Here, she tied off the wrappings, her soft and saddened gaze lifting towards Rangiku's. He is an honorable man. Rangiku wanted nothing more than to cry from Sui-Fong's words, she wanted to wail out as tears streamed down her face. She wanted to cry for hours, as she hurt inside for doing that to the young man. She wanted to tell him sorry, she wanted him to know that he could be with her and others if he wanted, she wanted to make him the happiest man alive, and to never let him go. She did all but that last thing, wailing and letting herself cry into the shoulder of Sui-Fong. A few hours went by since the preliminaries, and one Anko Madarashi was feeling stressed. How could she not, having faced her former sensei, and the curse mark activating before she could truly try to finish the man off? She hated him so much for what he did, but even her fury could not help her against the pain of the accursed thing. So, where did she go? To the pub, of course. She and her best bud Kurenai would come here all the time, take a few or a lot for Anko drinks. But, her friend decided that today they would not be relaxing together, instead the game jutsu user would be helping her students, somehow, all of them passing. It was a surprising upset when Hinata actually won against her cousin, Niji. What was more so, was that it was Kiba who shouted down from the ranks, inspiring her to keep going, despite the majority of her body numb from the cousin's use of the Byakugan. Anko waved the thought off. She didn't need a drinking buddy to make her afternoon good, no, she'd have a great afternoon without Kurenai. She would drink some guy under and get money from the bets. She could imagine it now, some poor sap betting she could be bested and be brought under the table. Then, she got the money from the passed-out drunk's wallet. The Madarashi came through the doors and found herself staring at the back of that Naruto fellow. He was drinking heavily, whiskey and rum, he didn't care, he'd slap the money down on the counter and chug whatever was there for him to drink. Anko sat down by him, seeing that the boy was down in a rut. Hey, the disqualification jetting to you that bad? It'll be alright, you got next year. Tatiba, her words meant to help him were dried up and bitten off when he turned to face her, his tinted goggles off, showing little silent tears drip off his chin. A mental curse left her mind as she realized that it was something else entirely. "Hey man, what's wrong?" she asked, concern drawn across her face. Usually, if it was a close friend, she would have smacked them, got them over it, but she didn't know Naruto well enough to do that, recognizing that her words would hinder rather than help. So, she opted to listen to him. "This girl I've been with for a while now, I came home, and she was on the couch with someone we let in our house." His voice dropped, pain in his voice. He knew he and the QB had done the deed once, but she forced herself on him, and he couldn't do anything, but to come home and see Rangiku willingly doing that was something else entirely. Anko responded with, "Did you kill the bastard that?" "It was a woman, and I left without them saying a word." "Oh." Her eyes widened to dinner plates. "Damn, that was bad, getting cheated on by a guy was one thing, but a woman? That was just adding insult to injury." Anko felt sorry for him and without thought, placed an arm around him. He froze up from her touch, but eventually, he relaxed into it. He didn't cry, he didn't weep, he was silent, ungiving in what happened. His tears did not make a sound as they ran down his cheeks. Anko held him in that bar for a long while and eventually they left, taking him to her apartment across town. When they got inside, she directed him to the couch, almost forcing him into her lap as she comforted him. All of that night, they stayed like that, Naruto falling asleep on her thighs. Anko dare not remove him, her shift, knowing he was going through something a young lad like him as good-intentioned as he was experiencing. She couldn't say for sure or not, but she almost heard him sigh when she placed a hand on his back just before sleep took her too. Anko Madarashi woke up to the smell of bacon and eggs and wait. Was that the subtle smell of Anko? Her eyes snapped open, her hungry mouth watering a slight. She looked about and in her kitchen, spotted Naruto. At her stove. Cooking. Naruto was cooking. "Sweet baby mama gonna get her some breakfast." Her words came out as quick as her feet, springing off the couch and leaping into the kitchen. When she reached the stove, she was slapped in the face by a spatula. "Bad girl," came his half-hearted warning as he flipped the eggs and bacon. But, he held out a stick of dango for her. She silently forgave him for the slap and began to gnaw on the stick of her favorite food. Her eyes widened and she nearly fell on the floor. "This so good," she yelled with a mouthful of food. "Yeah, I know, just ought to be nice to you after letting me sleep here for the night, it's the least I could do, I'll pay for the groceries if you don't mind," he told, still holding the stick out for her to eat the dango off of. She finished and threw her arms over his chest, behind him. Her breasts pressed against his back but to her surprise he didn't make a move to get her off, instead, he continued to check and flip what was sizzling in the pan. "You know," she whispered in his ear, "you'd make a great housewife." She teased. "Oh really? I guess you can't cook for yourself then." He teased right back, making her frown a slight. "Ah, don't be so mean," she pouted. Naruto gave a chortle. He was still angry about what happened last night and decided to just stay away for a while, at least until he could talk to Rangiku again. But, he pushed those thoughts to the side and settled for talking with Anko. "So, you won't mind me staying here for a little bit, won't you? You gonna parent? And dango? Make this a more beneficial stay and deal." Her hands began to move back up his chest and to his shoulders. Those slim hands slid down the side of his back and towards his sides. Before she could go any further, he turned about, throwing eggs and bacon on a plate behind her. He threw the pan in the sink, along with the spatula, and began walking towards the door, grabbing his trench coat, fedora, tinted goggles, and Hacho Omimashita on the way. At the open door, he looked back on her. "Hey, let's just make it good food and the like, I'd rather get some of the issues in that part of life straightened out before we go a knockin' boots." And he left, closing the door behind him. Anko had wide eyes, brows knit and confused. Did he just beat block himself? Could he even do that? Could a guy do that? She looked into the window and saw her reflection. She still, as ever, had those curves that made men in the village look twice. Although her chest wasn't backbreakingly large, it however was larger than most, her hips the same way, a strong curve of flesh. Her belly was smooth and her legs dipped just right. But he walked away like that? Without a second glance? Hell no. Not like that. She wouldn't allow such an indignity to her womanly charms, she'd go after him now, she'd at least get a blush or something of the like out of him. In her mind, that was her mission, and after the Hokage gave her leave due to the brief meeting of her former sensei, she could without a doubt pull it off. Downing her eggs, bacon, and beloved dango, the Madarashi left, opening the door to follow him. "Oh, sorry, wrong house." "Wah." Anko took a pause, slowing down a moment. Just as she opened the door to follow him, she found a woman with long and God bless they were luscious orange hair. Her bright blue eyes shined, and her civilian clothes, yellow top with a pink skirt, the second thing to come to her mind. The first thing after the hair was her large, very firm. There was no beating around the bush about it, she had larger breasts than her. Maybe even a certain Sanon's. Wait, her mind backtracked, you're looking for Naruto, aren't you? She nodded. Why? She asked, her suspicions getting to her. Me and him are dating and. Ah, so you're the one who cheated on him, I figured. Anko felt a bit angry, actually meeting this lady made her pretty pissed. She was the one who made Naruto sops. It wasn't the right word, nor was he necessarily angry, just, he was putting up a wall, and it wasn't right for him to do that. He was always happy, or at least, tried to make others happy. But this woman, she was the cause of him being so distant lately. Rangiku found she did not like this woman's words whatsoever. I wasn't cheating on him. She insisted, almost seething. Yeah, laying on top another woman and making out ain't cheatin'. Anko shot back. Both began a war of glares, brows furrowed, waiting for the other to lift a fist or something of the like. In the end, Anko scoffed and turned away, closing her door behind her as she began making her way down the street to the Hokage's office. She gave a backwards glance and shouted back at the woman. At least leave him alone for a bit before you go talk to him. And then she left. Rangiku still stood there, fuming in indignant anger. She followed as Raishi here, stifling through the different ones around until she came here. Rangiku had intended to tell him the truth and take him back with her. She had figured he'd understand and know what she meant to do. But, something nodded her from that Anko lady's words. Was she right? Should she just wait until he was ready and then tell him she wanted to make him happier? Was that what was the right thing to do? In the end, she resigned to listen to the Midarashi's words. Naruto stood in front of the Hokage, the old man sitting behind his desk with a scroll in hand and a bird perched atop his other. The old man nudged it and sent the hawk away and threw the scroll to Naruto. The blonde caught it and turned it over in his hands, recognizing the symbol for the land of lightning and one he didn't know. The mission, specifically to me? He asked, a bit curious. The wise nod and Jiji said, this is actually from the Raikage himself, eh? Naruto's eyes widened a slight for just a moment. He tore the seal off and opened the scroll, reading down what was written. He closed the seal and looked back up to Sarutobi, whose face was a riddle of curiosity. It's a formal invitation to race him. Naruto deadpanned. The Hokage's brows lifted high. Really? He wouldn't just challenge anyone. Naruto, he is the self-declared fastest man alive. And he lives up to that. Although he tried to keep his face stern and his voice even, he couldn't deny the surprise he had. Naruto stashed the scroll away in the dark folds of his trench coat and set his gaze back up towards Jiji. I accept. The old man nodded but informed Naruto in his more stoic voice of his that he'd have to bring along a jonin in the case that the village hidden in the clouds decided they would take Naruto. Wouldn't I need more? I'm a genin, after all. His voice hit a hard stone then. Naruto, you may not have the words chunin or jonin written as your status, but I know what happened between you and Zabuza and what happened in the woods with my former student. You have by far the fastest growth a genin could have and only a few have gotten as strong as you so quickly. I believe more than one would be excessive. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. So, who are you taking as a jonin? You can take any of the ones that aren't training students for. I'll go. Sarutobi nearly had a heart attack when Anko appeared through the open window, grinning wildly between Naruto and the Hokage himself. With a hand to his chest, Sarutobi took deep breaths in and deep breaths out, realizing he was getting too old for these kind of scares. He took a calming glance at the woman and told her she would have to behave herself. Oh, between me and Naruto, what kind of trouble could we get into? Oh, lighten up you two. I ain't gonna start a war. Fine, I'm headed towards the gate, I promise I won't cause a ruckus. And with that, Anko exited the window. Sarutobi placed a hand on his face, trying to keep himself from losing his temper. He tilted his head to Naruto, who agreed to go with her, and sighed. He would need some sake soon, he really just needed a break. Rangiku was back at the Naruto's apartment, sulking over herself. Sui-Fong came by and put a hand on her shoulder, asking how it went. Rangiku merely moaned in frustration. Did you explain to him why? He wasn't there. Sui-Fong frowned and decided to sit by her. Her hand shifted to the woman's back, sliding up and down to comfort her. I think he wants to have distance for some time, do you think that will help? Rangiku found herself say. It would be best, and then maybe you can find your voice and tell him what you had intended. Ranjiku's head tilted towards her friend, at least what she thought they were, and nodded. I think he's gonna go on a mission for that Hokage of his. She told, leaning into the petite woman. Really? So, how long will he be gone? Don't know. Was Ranjiku's reply as she drew her blue gaze up to Sui-Fong's darker one. The orange-haired lass leaned into Sui-Fong, their temples touching. A dark blush drew up across the petite woman's cheeks, but she did not avert her eyes from the curvier woman's soft gaze. "You know I never said I wanted to volunteer for helping you with this," she stuttered out. "Sui-Fong, I know you like it, don't lie. Plus, we might be able to get Orochi into this too, they are both a lot alike," Rangiku told, making Sui-Fong stop, thinking about it. It was true, both Naruto and the Queen of the Flash Step were both similar. Both didn't want to follow the way things were, both always enjoyed being cheeky most of the time. And, advantage to her, she could get closer to her former teacher, and maybe even more so. Rangiku smirked a slight as Sui-Fong tipped her head back and leaned into a gentle kiss, seemingly agreeing with the prospect. When she pulled her head back, both their heads thick with renewed vigor, she began to nod fervently. Rangiku smiled with joy and got up. "Alright, then I guess we're gonna go on a little escapade, get your stuff together, cause we are going to get Naruto back, but first, we have to meet a little black cat before we leave." As Sui-Fong looked on at Rangiku, she decided that the orange-haired lass had the largest grin she had ever seen except for Naruto's of course. The blonde Jinchuriki himself was leaping through the treetops with Anko by him. They had been going on through the trees for some time, leaping on through at a very steady pace. The sun he could see was just in the middle of the sky, telling them that they had a few hours to go before they reached the border before nightfall. His blue eyes slid to the side, peering at Anko for a moment. He kinda had a good idea why she came, the woman wanting to get in his pants as it were. Or, maybe not, he didn't know for sure, but had that inkling that she was going to try tonight. If anything, he would gladly accept that and do that with her, but that would be hypocritical of himself. Rangiku had done just the same, and by sleeping with Anko, he'd do the same. So, he kept himself from doing so, knowing how wrong it'd be. That is to say that he didn't think she was pretty, by no means, she was in fact very beautiful, in her way. With his thoughts out of the way, Naruto struck up a conversation with his companion. "So, what is Lightning Country like?" he asked, getting her attention. "Very cloudy, it's Raikage, supposedly the third or so down the line of his village's Kages to be called Raikage. But, it's nice, we've even traded another tailed beast with them, but recently, they've done some crappy things." "Like what?" "Meh, tried taking the Byakugan and the Nine Tails. But, it's been a while since then, so if this mission goes well, relations between our villages might be better." Naruto nearly tripped over a branch. "Really? So this race I'll have with the Raikage, it really is important, huh?" "Yep. So you better lose trying your hardest or win with a humble bow, cause that man does not like sore winners," she told, a grin on her face. "So, the entire relation between us and another village is riding on your shoulders. So don't cause a war, Naruto," she yelled back, as if the prospect was funny. Naruto looked ahead and mumbled under his breath. "Well shit." Night had crawled over the land after several hours of tree hopping, the moon soon rising with its wake. The two shinobi decided it was best to take a rest and begin early in the morning to make their journey towards the village hidden in the clouds. Anko decided to set up a small sleeping bag. Naruto, however, decided to choose an unconventional method of sleeping arrangements. Naruto lay curled up in a hammock made of the familiars he's killed. It was nice, you know, laying in the captured souls. They were soft, surprisingly, and with naught but a command, he could manifest them in whichever shape or form he wished. Useful things, familiars. But, as night rolled on and the dark sky his only thing to look out to, he began to let his thoughts drift towards Rangiku, that woman he came to find something like a spark of love in. He remembered the first time they met in that forest, both fighting that hollow who came out of nowhere. He remembered a lot of things about how they spent their time together, though she was lazy, she was good at heart. Though, no matter what, he couldn't get the image out of his mind of Rangiku cheating on him. He tried to remember and keep his mind steeled to what it was before that, but his mind would always drift back to that scene. Naruto wasn't mad at Sui-Fong, not really, but he couldn't quite know how to feel about what he saw. The guy part of his mind wanted to shout at him and tell him that he should have gone in and joined, if it was that. But he rejected the thought, thinking in that honorable mind of his that she wouldn't do that she was just cheating. How wrong he was. Naruto eventually just shook his head, keeping his mind off of the image, wiping it from his mind. He shifted in the hammock and closed his eyes, hoping sleep would keep him from thinking anymore. A few minutes more, and he fell into a deep sleep. In that same moment, Rangiku and Sui-Fong, who were both in full Shinigami attire, were making their way towards Orochi's place. They had left the gate for the Sarate a few moments before, already making their way towards her little house, in high hopes the woman would come back with them. Rangiku was unsure if Orochi would accept the offer or if she would want to be in such a way with Naruto and them. But, she was determined to make it up to Naruto after what she had done, even if this was counterintuitive. She didn't care if it were wrong, she just wanted him to be happy. When finally they made their way to her house, when they stood before its threshold, a feeling of anxiety began to etch through them, gnawing at them. What if they were just kicked out when telling the Queen of the Flash Step their plan? What if they were unable to do what they were setting themselves to do? What if Naruto still rejected her and hated her for what she had done? That one tripped Rangiku up the most. But before they could chicken out, the door swung ajar, nearly scaring them off. Before them was Uruchi, her sandaled feet just before the edge of the door. She placed a hand on her black spandex-like pants, curvy hips swayed to the side. She lifted and adjusted the sleeve on her orange robe-like top. Her unoccupied hand came to rest the side of her violet-haired head with her elbow against the doorframe, a ponytail hanging it in the back with bangs framing her bright shining eyes and smile. "What can I owe the pleasure of having you two show up at my place? Surely it can't be a silly business meeting." They didn't reply, so she beckoned them in, offering tea that they gladly took. When all settled down and they could relax, Uruchi asked why they had come to her home. The two schemers looked between one another, but Rangiku was the one to speak first. "There's this guy that we think you would like to meet," she told, her voice confident as she looked into the dark eyes of Uruchi. Those dark eyes of the queen seemed to shift from between them, as if she was trying to figure out the meaning of those words of hers. The orange-haired lass was about to speak up again when Uruchi finally asked, "Who is he?" But that set of interest in her eyes that which both timid and confident woman could see, Rangiku responded, setting the bait and hook. "He's someone who might be a challenge to you and your shunpo." "Really?" Her interest was piqued, taking the bait, and Sui-Fong decided it was time to reel her in. "He beat me in a fight fairly with ease, I could not follow his movements very well when he moved." Uruchi's brows raised to her hair at that, surprised that someone could escape her former student's pensive eyes. She stood, a grin on her face, a glint and fire waving behind those dark eyes of hers. As they shone brightly, and with Uruchi caught up by the line, Rangiku told where they were going, only interesting her even further. With that, they left for the shinobi world. Naruto woke up with a weight over him, and even before he opened his eyes, he knew who it was. There, laying atop him, was the purple-haired kunoichi Anko Mitarashi, her sleeping bag still on the ground. She was sleeping soundly, her face buried into his broad chest. Her back seemed to rise and fall with even breaths, so relaxed, cuddled up to him. Naruto wanted to shake her awake, he wanted to get moving, seeing as the sun would soon be rising, but he found that he couldn't do that, especially when her face came up to bare, her cheek rubbing the side of his chest. He opted to let her sleep instead, sliding his hands up to her back, giving a slight rub to it. What nearly sounded like a perk came out of the snake user and with an errant thought, made a blanket with the familiars. They stretched over and laid atop them, making the hammock a near cocoon, with only their heads left in the open. The gracious smile spread like butter on her face, and her arms encircled the young man. Naruto let himself lean back his head and relax, enjoying this feeling, to just hold someone again. His mind flashed to the many a time he and Rangiku would do this, though the position was reversed, with his head to her chest. But he didn't care, it was just something that he missed, and now, for at least until the twinkling of the sun's warm rays flittered through the canopy above, he could enjoy it. Eventually, the time came when she stirred, waking from her pleasant slumber. Her eyes fluttered open to the side of Naruto, staring up into the trees, a gentle look about him. She liked that, seeing him content. His eyes fell to her, and Anko nearly jumped as he placed a hand to her cheek. "Ready to go?" While she blinked, feeling herself come back to reality. "I asked if you were ready to go," he reiterated. "Oh, yeah." No one moved. "Sorry," she told, moving her face away as she stood, keeping his sharp eyes from seeing the flush of red on her face. When Anko hopped off, he retracted his familiars back in his trench coat. Anko moved to grab her sleeping bag, trying to face away from Naruto. She gathered it up, sealing it away, still bent down, feeling her blush creep away, leaving her cheeks so that they were once more back to normal. When she turned, Naruto had a strange look on his face, a brow raised to her, but before she could ask why, he said. "You need a belt." "Why?" was her question. Of all things, why would she need a belt? She wore a skirt, granted with belt loops, but still. That look remained on his face, but it shifted, like he was unsure to tell her something. However, when he did, her face flushed deeper than before. "You were about to moon me." "What?" she screamed, clutching the rear of her skirt. She pointed at him, as if she was trying to accuse him of something, but he waved a hand to her. "Nah, you can't say anything bad. If I say you had a nice butt I lose, if I said you need to cover it up, I lose. But since I told you to get a belt, I keep you from being exposed in front of many people who might blackmail you with it, which is my win, but I get caught staring, which is a lose for me again." He paused, watching her finger begin to fall. "So no matter what, I lose, even if I had or have good intentions." Her finger fell completely and felt the fire of resistance sputter out. But she wouldn't allow that, she wouldn't allow such a thing to go unpunished regardless. Even if he were, by his words, right. So, instead of yelling and being angry with him, she went with it, letting her face soften and an innocent gleam to cover her eyes. So, you liked what you saw. The twitch came to his eye, and Naruto had to keep himself from slamming his head to one of the trees. He thought she was very pretty, sexy even, but he had to keep himself in control. Oh come now, Naruto QB's voice came through his thoughts, making him pinch the bridge of his nose. Just for once, give in, get back at her for once, just give in to it. He ignored the sweet sounds of honey that was his tailed beast's voice. Or, would you rather be pulled in here, with me? I can accommodate you again. THWAK. Naruto finally did it, snapping his head right into the closest tree, ripping its wooden fibers apart as it began to fall. With a great crash did it make, and Naruto leaned his head back, fists clenched. Anko became sheepish, unable to see his face, unable to tell what he was going to do next, his still form like a wraith. She jumped a little when his head snapped to her, a deadpan expression riddling it. No, he began, more, he finished. Anko imagined she looked like a doe right now, eyes white and skittish from that glare. Naruto turned away and Flash stepped up to above the trees, standing in the air. Let's get underway. We wasted time. He shouted back down. Anko snapped out of it after that, running up the side of one of the trees as they made their way to their destination. Rangiku, Sui-Fong, and Orochi stood before the aged face of Sarutobi, waiting for him to answer their question. They had asked the man where Naruto was, and he seemed to have a gleam in his eye after that, his eyes regarding Rangiku and the others with scrutiny. She hoped the Hokage would allow them to go after the lad. Why? Was all he asked. He's on a mission now, and it is imperative that that is not disturbed. Well, we can help. Orochi spoke up, a friendly smile on her face. I doubt you can, all it is a race, and if he can beat a certain man, well, it's a bit complicated. What if I race too, and promote that Naruto guy? Certainly there is no limit to those who can race, right? The Hokage was about to answer when the woman he was talking to flickered, appearing before him, a smile still across her face. He held back a jerk of surprise, not expecting such speedy movement. Sarutobi was going to suggest that racing wasn't a good idea, however, this Orochi seemed to defy what his brain wanted to say, because this mission could make or break relations with the Raikage and his people. He coughed into his hand and spoke calmly. Fine, so long as you do not cause a war, be polite, and when you catch up to Naruto, inform him of the slight change, they should be halfway there, so you have a good chance of catching up with him near the end if you hurry. He leaned back, his wrinkled hand reaching into a drawer, handing her a map, telling Orochi to follow it, and dismissed them. Hold it, Sarutobi suddenly spoke up, gaze shifting towards Rangiku just as they got to the door. Why do you intend on meeting Naruto? I believe I heard that you two are not in good standing, is that right? Ranjiku's eyebrows raised in surprise, a step taken back. She hadn't known they were being watched, and if so, who had done so? But, his pensive stare caught her, and she could not help but bite down her thoughts and speak. I want to make it up to him. Her eyes peeled away from his. What I did was wrong and stupid, I never wanted to hurt him. I thought that he would. Well, I guess it doesn't matter what I thought. Sarutobi laced his fingers together, letting his elbows rest on the desk, staring at her. His pensive gaze picked up the light blush forming across her face, and then another one when, out the corner of one of his eyes, noticed the Sui-Fong woman do the same. His eyebrows shot up to his receding hairline when he realized what she meant. Yao for Kangano. The Hokage shouted so fast they barely understood him, but they left nonetheless. When they were gone, he went to his crystal ball, the images of people flickering across its steamy surface. It finally settled to the orange-haired lass and her compatriots. Now, even as an old man, he had to admit that they were quite beautiful in their respective ways, but he was still unsure what their relationship with Naruto was. He just hoped that the orange-haired woman's words were true, that young man's been through quite a bit. He watched them go out the gate, and suddenly, they flickered, disappearing into thin air, escaping his view. Naruto and Anko were at the gates to enter the village hidden in the clouds, both a bit tense, when two guards were standing at attention instead of two slackers Naruto liked to joke around with. Naruto couldn't tell if they were always like that, or if they were ordered to be extra attentive per their arrival. They walked up to them, both the guards, a man and woman of similar countenance, greeted them with a glint of reverence. Sir. Began the man. You are Uzumaki Naruto, summoned here by our Raikage. Shouted the woman. Correct. Both of them now asked with that military speech. Naruto smiled warmly and held out a hand to them. They flinched a slight, not in fear, but mere surprise. The man shook first with a nod, and then the woman did, both of their eyes wide, as if expecting him to fly off or something. But he just shook their hand, smiling to them, greeting them like anyone else. Why are you two so tense? Asked Anko, foregoing formality. The twins looked between one another, then answered as one. We heard rumors from everywhere of how a very green genin defeated a dangerous jonin. Naruto's mind clicked. Oh, so that's why, he thought, rubbing his chin. The people of Wave had made up for their word that they would spread his name and actions. They made good on it, the word of the people. He would have to return there sometime and thank the people. Maybe he'd put on a show for them, entertain them with a festival. That wouldn't be bad, and he would love to see the graves of his fellow fallen shinobi, pay respects. His office. Blinking his clouded mind away, Naruto apologized to the twins for spacing out, asking them to repeat themselves. I would like you to go to his office, he lives up closer to the clouds than even any of us. Naruto thanked them smiling and began making his way through the gates, Anko in tow. He, however, stopped short of the threshold. His sapphire eyes widened to two sliver slits of scary scarlet. He could feel his heartbeat like a large bass drum, slow and loud in his ears. Unbidden, his familiars swirled beneath his trench coat, as if ready to strike out at anything that was too close. Rangiku and the two others stood by the guards, her eyes just as wide. She clutched her hands together, as if to protect herself from her own wrenching heart. The air was tense, as if electrified with a negative charge, and it felt as though that any movement would be death. Rangiku took the chance, took a single step towards Naruto, but flinched as he seemed to snap around, staring down at her like a dark wraith, ready to swallow her very soul. His trench coat pulsed about, lifting and snapping around as winds with which there should be none gushed a gale all around him, his Raishi like a rising inferno, blazing about and around him, renting the air, pushing Anko away. A screech filled the sky, from that of the tormented souls that dwelled in the abyss of his crimson trench coat. The gloved hand, the color of an icy blizzard, raised itself, as if some god pulled the strings to the arm, so detached from the rest of the person. Fingers that which had more countenance of a beast than that of man's snapped over tinted goggles, snatching them away, ripping them off and casting them into the earth. The angry red of scarlet slits glowed like the pokers of some great furnace, piercing and pinioning the terrorized form of Rangiku Matsumoto. She tried to speak, but her tongue was ash in her mouth, dried and barren was her thinking, leaving her to stare into the eyes of a devil. Leave me alone. His words grated the sound of life itself, such horrid tones only a hollow would wish to have, the force of his Raishi forcing her to fall to her knees, slamming her to the ground. Her face fell flat as his power increased, unable to combat against such strength. Her eyes watched as he turned on his heel, making his strides ever away from her, out of reach. Naruto. She felt herself slip into darkness, the pressure too much for her to bear. But, just when she was about to give in, to obey his words, to let him slip through his fingers once more, for doing nothing, she heard a voice. Rangiku. She knew that voice. For once, we will not be lazy. An echo. You want him, don't you? Yes. Won't you fight for him, won't you be strong like him? Yes. Won't you stand amongst the ashes of destruction, just to see him again? Yes. Won't you stand and fight, won't you be more than Rangiku, more than me, something else? Yes. Then say it or he will forever be lost, to you old woman, say it, say my name and be with him. Yes. Bankai. Naruto halted his booted feet, feeling Ranjiku's spiritual power increase exponentially, leaping the gap between them, clinging to the other side. He turned around to witness a great gout of oceanic blue energy shoot into the sky, piercing the heavens. It changed shape, the color turning a heated orange now, the very essence of it becoming that of a large cat, a single flame at the tip of its tail. Its maw opened up, swallowing the very person it came from, exploding out in a shower of light and power. When it was all done, and the bright brilling light faded, there remained Rangiku Matsumoto. Her hair was curled and strewn back into a ponytail of sorts, braided thickly with an orange flame burning yet, not eating away the tip of the tail. Her eyes were now a slight slit, larger than before. Her Shinigami clothes were now sleek black and skin tight, a standing collar inches up her angelic face. What was her zanpakuto were now 2 black and 4 long claws, her hands gripping the horizontal wooden handles, till her knuckles were white, and the bars that reached over and around her slender forearm were strict against her. More Hineko. Her voice seemed to rise above to the very heavens. Naruto stared into her eyes, seeing that she was now close to, if not at his power now, nearly the same. He was uncertain, but he didn't care. He didn't care that she achieved Bankai, he just wanted to get away. But, he couldn't help the anger that was in him, he couldn't help his glare that still fought to pierce her. Naruto. She shouted. I will never leave you. I will never hurt you again. I will fight until you accept my apology and hear me out. Even as her bellow reached him, she saw him growl like an animal. Then I guess you're gonna have to fight for it. He howled out as he grabbed his zanpakuto, flying at her with the saw cleaver already fully released. Naruto crashed into her clawed blades, sparks flashing out as he flew her through and back into the tree line. She twisted her blades, breaking away from his strong stalemate with her. Rangiku spun, Moru Hineko slashing through the air as Naruto used Shunpo in the last instant. He appeared above her, swinging down. She dodged, Flash stepped above him, slashed down, then he did the same, yet this time, a Sudasaresa brewing around his blade. She threw her clawed weapon forward with both clenched hands, thrusting the Bankai into the path of the blade, pincering it between two of the middle claws. Red Riatsu completely arched over Rangiku, sweeping past and harmlessly exploding in the forest below. Gritting his teeth, Naruto snapped a leg forward. The Matsumoto gasped as her gut seemed to betray her, that kick sending her through the sky in a fiery pain. Quickly, Naruto reached into his trench coat, pulling out the blunderbuss-like Zanpakuto, shouldering his Hacho Omimashita in favor for his Dejina Hito. Naruto leapt high into the air as his former love took a diving thrust at him. Urasudo. He pulled the trigger, letting loose a shot of Riatsu at her. Shunpo saved Rangiku as she appeared in a flicker below him, sliding back on the air. He shot again, firing another gout at her. Her form disappeared, gaining countenance higher to the right. Shots of Burasudo rung out like thunder, Rangiku getting closer and closer with each missed shot. She was about and before him a moment later, already swinging her claws. Time seemed to slow, and he could see her expression. Brows were furrowed, and her eyes shone with determination, and a frown of concentration etched her focused face. Then he pulled the trigger. Boom. Somehow she slapped his Zanpakuto away at the last moment, sending the shot up into the heavens. Now too close for him to swing and too late to dodge, her blades, both weapons gripped in her hands, pierced his gut, as if in recompense for him kicking her so hard in the same place. Naruto daren't move, feeling his blood try to drain from him. With the help of familiars, he kept as much red from escaping him. He could still beat her, and he planned to kick her away and continue, but stopped. Suddenly, her head slumped against his broad chest, resting it there. "You can't go anywhere now, not without me." She screamed into his chest, as if to order his heart to listen. "I won't," he heard her choke on her words as tears began shedding from her face. I won't ever let you escape again. I won't. She cried out, her temple turning against him. "I will make you happy." Ranjiku's voice was swallowed by her large wet tears as her head lifted to him. "I won't ever stop caring for you." Naruto watched with a slew of mixed feelings as her form flashed, her Bankai disappearing back into her Shikai, her Zanpakuto now sheathed in her Hakama sash. Without the support of her newly achieved Bankai, she fell into him, arms wrapping themselves around him completely, her head on his shoulder. Why his voice shook in her ear. "Because I love you, Naruto." Why Naruto choked out into her ear. "Because I love you, Naruto." Her words. Ranjiku's words. They rung in his ears still, bouncing around in his skull, never settling, never finding a spot in his brain to sit itself on. The words, though he was thick-headed, were strong, with conviction only she could have, her words the only ones that could have such a magnitude, in that moment. The words, finally, pierced and laid themselves in his mind, seating themselves, rooted, nevermore could they be removed, always there forevermore. Then why would you? His words were strangled in his gullet, his own tears beginning to well up, cooling the fiery crimson slits, bleeding them till they were once more large blue orbs. She held him tighter, closer to her body, flush with her, making it so that there was no distinction between the middle, no one if they were looked upon could tell where they were of two separate people. "No more than anything else, I want you to be happy. I did it because you deserve more than what this world can offer. I was born in a world without love, and I was so lonely. I see it in your eyes, Naruto." Sapphire eyes met. "For too long you've been alone." His mind fell away at that, completely and utterly gone, no more was his thoughts prevalent. He didn't know when his arms fell around her, only that they did. He did not know when his temple pressed into hers, only that they did. He did not recognize his own voice when he forgave her for what she did. Only that he did. When finally they returned, they came to the side of several guards, all tense at his arrival. They were, however, not as tense when they saw a beautiful girl on the young man's shoulders. They looked, or at least felt, much like the Anbu back in Konoha, very stern. One of them, a young woman with the same outfit and armor as the rest, stepped up. Her gray vest however only covered her stomach and not her chest. She had gray fatigues and fishnet beneath that armor, a short cut of blonde locks framing her angular face. Her eyes, albeit blue, were not sapphire and deep, instead, pale like ice, something Naruto found amusement in. "Why have you made a ruckus?" Even her voice was stoic, reserved. Naruto beat his head to the side, then to a glance to Sui-Fong and the woman next to her. His eyes shifted back to the blonde woman and grinned in what felt like the longest time. The men and women behind the blonde flinched, but she did not. "Hey, what's your name? You didn't flinch, so you must be strong," he shouted, walking closer with Rangiku at his side. The woman tensed up but made no move for a kunai. When she said nothing, he stopped short of a few yards from her. "They're pretty cool." he told, holding out a hand. He let out a laugh, it was hard and sent a chill down the spines of all who heard it. But, the blonde woman still held her composure. At that, Naruto let his grin fall to a small smile. I have no intentions of messing with your village, I merely had a small skirmish with my little Rangiku here. I do apologize for the disruption I may have had, I promise no more such things will occur. Now, if you please, I would like it if you took me and my compatriots to your Raikage. She stared blankly into his eyes, waiting for him to say more, but got nothing else from him. So, with a turn of the heel, she began making her way towards the gates, allowing him to follow. Upon passing her fellow shinobi, she ordered them to let go of Anko, who was surprisingly quiet. Naruto saw her and tilted his head for her to come along. She watched him, her gaze shifting to Rangiku. Both women shared a glance, all but saying 1,000 words between them. In the end, however, both smiled, and all four began making their merry way towards A and his office. They were taken up to a large crystal-shaped, blue, building that lay erect in the sky. This place served the purpose of the Raikage's office, which when they stepped in, looked much like Sarutobi's. When they entered through his door, they came encounter with a very muscular black man, sitting down in a chair which when they came in stood abruptly. He was tall, too, corn rolls of blonde hair and a mustache on his lip. He wore a different coloration of the red Hokage cloak and hat and was very serious when he made eye contact with them, no more so when he spotted Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto, the man who defeated the Devil of the Mist. Yo. Naruto gave a two-fingered salute and smiled to the man. That'd be me. The man came around the desk of his, coming to stand but arm's length away. They say you defeated Zabuza with a single strike and that you were fast, even for a jonin. I want to race you, I want to know for sure that I am the fastest man alive, and if that is not true and I have wasted Konoha's time, then I give up one of my shinobi in recompense. He held out a large hand. Although I would rather not take one of your people, I see there would be no swaying ya. Naruto shook the man's hand, a single up and down, and they broke away. You would be correct, now, since you've came here in such a short time, I would like you to take a rest in an inn, that way you will be at your fullest strength. We will accommodate you completely. With that, the man's words being absolute, he turned away and sat back down, but not before Naruto said. Thank you Raikage, for the invite. A, call me A, we are competitors, are we not? Yes we are, A, I hope it will be a good race. A mighty nod. And finally, they left. The blonde woman from before led them towards a large building, seldom and speech still and told them that they would be staying here and to ask for any room they wanted. Naruto thanked her and began making his way inside. The others began to follow when he stopped, turning to face the woman. You don't have to follow us, Orders? She told calmly. Oh, well, orders be orders. If, at the very least however, here he turned to look her right in the eyes, tell us your name, if you are gonna follow us anywhere. The blonde woman stared into his eyes, glimpsing a gleam of interest in those sapphire orbs of his. Was he so adamant about finding her name that he would press it so? How far could he go, what lengths will he go, just for such simple things as a name? Was it just his nature, or perhaps, no, well it could be that, as a kid, he was unrecognized, and now that he was at least by her leader, he dare not treat anyone else in such a way, to ignore them would be doing what others had done unto him. But the sigh, she told him. Samui. The smile tugged at the corners of his lips, making her turn her eyes elsewhere, bringing them back to him with a nod. Well then, I thank you kindly. He bellowed with a wide grin, turning once more to go into the building, Samui following. They came inside, finding the first thing in sight to be a woman behind a desk, looking quite bored with herself. Her gaze shifted up towards them and found her eyes widen, brows lifted to her hairline. Her thoughts were that of this. That they were the strangest group of people she'd seen. A man in all red, whose cloths befit some alternate world, led them to her desk. At his side was a woman dressed in all black, a sword to her side, a smile on her face. The other two were strange as well, a petite, shorter woman with a pensive look, yet had a flamboyant yellow underneath the inside of that cloak, and the other, a dark-skinned woman with dark eyes that seemed to have a glint in them, as if she were a mischievous lass. At least there was one person she recognized. Samui. She called, crooning to her friend. The woman nodded, but she did not wave, to which the woman behind the desk did not like. She leapt over her station, sprinting full force, her feet thudding against the floor, with the sound of thunder rising at her heels. She slammed herself into Samui, bowling her over, rolling each other until the woman was atop her, a fist clenched. Wave to your friend Samui. She growled out, bonking the blonde woman over the head. Get off. Samui ordered, lifting her forearm to block another irate fist. No. You have to say you love me first. Don't give me that look. We've been good friends since we were little, so say it. Or I will blackmail you. Fine, she finally conceded, Kate Sylph, I love you, you are my sister, we are best friends. Now, this time, with passion. A grin spread across the black-haired woman's face, her dark eyes lighting up. Samui let out a bit of emotion then, scowling for but a moment before letting her face become placid once more. Her hand came up to the woman's cheek and with a bit of chakra, launched the woman off of her. The Kate girl flew up into the wall, slumping down with a blankness to her gaze. Samui stood. Unconscious, it's fine. She told briefly, walking towards the front desk and grabbing keys to the rooms, tossing out 5 to each of them. Sui-Fong, Anko, and Rangiku tossed theirs back, and Samui kept one. When they began making their way towards the top floor, Naruto told Rangiku, Anko, and Sui-Fong to go ahead to their room, tossing the latter the key figuring the former would end up doing something yet unsure of the snake user, and told Samui that he was going to talk to her referring to Orochimaru about something. She nodded and headed up, staying within earshot, just above a whisper, when she got up to the top. Naruto turned to Orochimaru and sighed. So, I don't know who you are exactly. My name's Orochimaru, she extended a hand, and you must be Naruto. A smile. Naruto took her hand. Those two brought you here? They began shaking hands. Yes, those two were nervous though when they saw you at the gates. They stopped shaking hands, letting their respective digits fall to their sides. Naruto found his usual smile fade. Then you know. He stated, already perceiving the answer. Just by looking at Orochimaru, he could tell she was not a dense woman, a perceptive one if anything else. He knew she knew why they brought her here, just the same as what Rangiku got in trouble with him in the first place for. He watched Orochimaru's smile soften. My former student and Rangiku. Those two vying devils. A sudden laugh echoed from her chest, a hearty one, her smile reaching up to the side of her cheeks once more. I have to say, convincing me because of my title, a challenger to my speed, and here I find you are already involved. A sigh left her lips. I don't know you, Naruto, but you are an interesting one, that's for sure. So, maybe after we get back from this village and to yours, we might be able to go on a date. I know they won't mind, considering what I've gathered. Naruto and her shared a smile, making their way up the stairs. Samui heard the coming footfalls, quickly turning, heading towards her room. Did she just hear that? If what her mind was beginning to process was true then, oh my, how her ears began to burn. Not cool. She told herself, stealing her mind, entering her room down the hall. Naruto and Orochimaru made it to the top of the stairs, a hallway with doors lining the sides. They opened their respective doors, wishing each other a good night. When Naruto entered his room, he noticed the chair in the corner of the rectangular room, a bed in the opposite corner, a nightstand by it with a lamp. He saw all 3 of them, Rangiku, Anko, and Sui-Fong on the bed, as if waiting for him. He smiled, tossing his trench coat, fedora, and saw Cleaver on the chair. She knows now. She doesn't seem to care though. Sui-Fong had wide eyes at that, Rangiku however. So, you don't mind if… No. I won't. Not anymore. If more come, and they are like her, then so be it. His eyes lingered towards Anko at that. He almost found a laugh at the back of his throat a moment later, thinking about it all. Everything was just tossed on its head now. This world was so screwed up, twisted and mangled, spat out by the breath of a silent god. No one seemed to take notice. They just went with it. So, perhaps, for now, he could give in to this insanity, this law of lawlessness. For once, on this subject, Naruto Uzumaki would give in to the beating of the world and allow himself to succumb to this sin. Rangiku woke with an airy head, as if she were made of air, light as a feather, feeling free without a worry. She opened her eyes and was caught to have a surprise that she was not holding onto a snoring blonde. She was, instead, holding fast to Anko, who did the same. Blinking a few times, she let out a confused, "Eh?" She was about to raise herself and untangle her limbs when Anko tugged her back. Rangiku sighed, but let herself snuggle back in, glad that someone probably Naruto had placed a blanket over them. Before she could fall back asleep however, a realization dawned on her. It was only Anko and her on the floor, so here was Naruto. Where's Sui-Fong? Speaking of Sui-Fong, she and Naruto sat at a round table, drinking coffee. They had decided to leave both usually the first two to get up anyway and, so Naruto suggested that they go out for coffee. She had never had such a thing, and so he egged her on for it. So, here they were, in a coffee shop, sitting in a windowed booth, across from one another. In truth, Naruto wanted to get to know Sui-Fong a bit better, and what way could he do that, you ask? Trying something new, see how they reacted to the experience. So, there are several kinds of coffee. Sui-Fong asked, trying the strange word on her tongue. She did not get out to the human world especially this one often, leaving her a bit bare-trodden on these modern things. Oh, she knew what a car was, she knew there was a thing called coffee and even of the internet. But that didn't mean she knew of how they worked, or in this case, tasted. Many cappuccinos, iced coffee, pumpkin spice, think you like that one. But for now, some hot vanilla creamer to edge off the bitter black coffee. I think you might like it. He told, a smile on his red-goggled face, his fedora nearly hiding that fact. She was bright but ill-shown to the world, and he took some pride in broadening her spectrum of things to try. He watched her grasp the handle of her cup, picked it up, bringing it to her lips. She stopped, and he noticed that he was staring a bit too intently, so with a slight hearty laugh, turned his head away, glancing back with his eyes, however, to watch her expression. Sui-Fong tipped it enough that she could take a sip, and when she did, found a bitter and sweet taste in her mouth. Her eyes widened, and the whole cup went vertical, tipping her head back as she gulped down the whole cup in one sitting. She slammed it down, and shouted for some pumpkin spice. The waitress immediately got on it. The ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha man. Naruto let out a full hearty tittering of laughter, a big ole grin on his face. She let out a giggle that sounded more like that of a schoolgirl's, and not of a prestigious second captain of the Gate 13. You know, I did not like you much at first. Sui-Fong told. Thanks. Do not give me that look. I simply mean that at first, I believed you were nothing more than a nuisance I had to deal with. Naruto's face turned sour, but it quickly shifted when she leaned over the table some, her dark eyes shining with a glint of light. But now, I see that you have a heart of gold behind that silver tongue. The Uzumaki found himself flabbergasted, unable to speak for a moment. But, he regained his composure and leaned forward. So close were they that their noses nearly touched, and when Sui-Fong thought he was going to kiss her, he spoke instead. And behind your cynicism, I find a softie. And he leaned back. A smile crept up her face, a blush crossing her cheeks for a moment. They sat there for a moment before they noticed two shadows over them. Their heads turned and came eye to eye with an irate Rangiku and Anko. Before either Naruto or her could say a word, they were grabbed, thrown over the shoulders of the two, and carried off. Just before they exited the coffee shop, Sui-Fong witnessed her pumpkin spice coffee delivered to their former table. "Nuo, my pumpkin spice," she cried as she was carried off to somewhere. High up in the clouded sky, far above the unknowing people of the Cloud Village, stood four white-clothed figures. Each bore some sort of semblance with that of an animal. A dark-skinned woman with brown hair that seemed to poof out like a lion's mane, a black-haired woman who covered herself in long-sleeved robes with the eyes as precise as a snake's. And a shorter petite woman who squatted down with a wicked grin, the look of an antelope with the hollow mask remains on her head. Each of them had these remains, resembling what they looked like before gaining the power of the Shinigami. Except one. She had a shaggy head of blonde hair, her short sun-kissed locks nearly covering her eyes. She had a high collar covering her face. Her form was very matured, curved, with a short bleach-white jacket, revealing the hazel skin of her smooth belly. She wore hakama pants that didn't hide the sides of her hips. When she spoke, her voice was not far from the tone of Samui. "I feel his presence, that man that Aizen-sama has assigned us to take." But, her eyes narrowed, "I also feel three others, two are Shinigami, and the third has little Ryuko, but a strange energy is there as well." The antelope-like one stood, taking a step on the air, pointing down at the village. "So what? Let's just get down there and kick some asses." Before she could do anything, the lion-like one grabbed the smaller one by the collar, holding her up. "Hey, we can't go till Harable-sama says so, Apache." The smaller one butted heads with the larger one, gritting her teeth. "Shut up, Mila Rose. We're stronger than them, we might as well get down there and have some fun." The two began to bicker, and the snake-like one began to giggle behind her sleeve. "Both of you are idiots." Her voice was like jingling bells. "What was that, son?" Both tall and short women glared over at the conservative one. The bickering became so much that the leader had to step in. "All of you, please stop, we are going down there." The short loud one looked at her leader with wide hopeful eyes. "And kick some ass?" Harable looked at her Frachian. "Yes." Naruto found himself encircled by Rangiku and Anko, cornering him in an ally, both women glaring down on him. Sui-Fong was at the side, confused and a bit sad that she didn't get her coffee. He too was confused, why were they mad at him for? It's not like he eloped with Sui-Fong or anything. "What did I do wrong?" he asked, getting both women to glare at him a slight harder, before both finally sighed. "We wanted coffee too." "Really?" With his own sigh, Naruto smiled. "Fine, let's go get you guys some." His smile suddenly disappeared, his face becoming stern, a frown across his face. The girls were confused, wondering why he was so quiet and serious, but they found out soon enough. With swiftness, Naruto drew out his saw cleaver, pulling the trigger to extend it. The girls had wide eyes, not because of what he did, but because of what they felt. Even Anko felt the build of Ryatsu around them. They too drew theirs and Pakuto, Anko pulling out her kunai, forming a circle with Naruto, ready for anything. The twitch of the ear was all Naruto got, the sound of swirling Ryatsu his only warning. He leapt away, hoping his shout got the others' attention given the sudden burst of a golden yellow beam shooting down from the sky, as if some irate god decided he no longer liked them. But, he turned in the air, leaping up with Shunpo, noticing the others began to increase the amount of Reishi chakra with Anko leaving him certain that they were fine, but that feeling disappeared when he felt a very powerful amount of Reiatsu begin to overwhelm his own. He pushed out more of his power, balancing the struggle with his and the mysterious source, at least for now. Before him appeared a woman, her sudden existence exalted by the static boom that accompanied her. She was likely the one who fired the shot of Reiatsu at him and the girls, which left a bit of a bitter taste in his mouth. Naruto would have to teach this woman what it meant to mess with his girls. Anko found herself in an estranged engagement with a short girl, a white mask forming a horn above her head. Since the blast and the warning shout, this girl had gone after her with relentless swings of her fists, a grin on her face. Anko at first was surprised, but sobered up and began dodging, blocking the kicks that this girl could snap out like a whip. Anko caught a fist to her face, her head twisting with it. She didn't let the force go to waste however, and let the momentum carry her own leg out, her shin connecting firmly with the mismatched-eyed girl's head, rolling her over. The sound of two distinct shink sounds snapped Apache's eyes open, the fist of Anko forcing her to stumble back into what felt like netting. Jaya! She screamed as it wrapped around her, restricting her from moving. Falling flat on her face, Apache glared up at Anko with her amber eye, her teeth grit like a steel trap. She saw a large grin on Anko that promised pain, due to her surprise Anko leapt away as a sizzling sound filled her ears. And boom. The ground shuddered with the force as explosive tags went off, leaving a smoky mess. Anko stood atop a building, that grin on her face ever prevalent, but as most things go for smoke clearing from an explosion, her target was still there, standing, with naught but a scratch. And was she more pissed off than anything? Sui-Fong was faring just the same, though in the air, staring down the calm smile of Sun. Oh, what a pity, I seems you have to fight me. The girl's light giggle made Sui-Fong's ears twitch a slight. This girl, had the feel of a hollow and a Shinigami, a mix that she had only felt with the intruder but a month ago or so. If that was the case, then their fight would be a hard one, which meant she had no room for holding back. But the flash of yellow light and the removal of her captain's cloak, she released her Shikai. Speeding forth with Shunpo guiding her feet, Sui-Fong leapt up, rolling as she came down, the air whistling with her movements. Sun's eyes widened, but narrowed a moment later, using her Sunito to avoid the strike. Cat and mouse was played as Sui-Fong went after the snake-like woman, getting under her radar as she landed at least one strike against her, the form of a butterfly appearing on Sun's back. The woman suddenly turned on Sui-Fong, two-pronged weapons appearing from her sleeves, one of them cutting Sui-Fong's side, the other keeping the gauntlet-like weapon from piercing her again. Oh my, it seems you are outmatched. Rangiku found herself staring down at a tall Amazonian woman, a double-edged sword clutched in her hands. Rangiku drew her Hineko, but did not make a move, instead, she asked the woman a series of questions. One that drew confusion on the Mila Rose's face. How far do you wish to take this? The ebony lion did not speak at first, but instead let one hand draw away from her sword. As far as Haribal-sama wishes. Do this, Rangiku smirked, a glint in her eyes. Let me ask you something else then. Do you know what Hineko means? A blank look, then, ash cat. Yes. Now, where do ashes come from? Fire, but why? Correct then, if ash comes from fire and this is my Shikai, then what would be my second release? Mila Rose did not like where this was heading and decided that these questions will end, cutting them off by the source of the annoyance. She dashed forth on a booming Sunito, even as the words were spoken, even as the blinding fire began its turbulent and explosive beginnings. All too late was she, far too away and too slow was her Sunito, as the words catalyzed the event. Bankai, more Hineko. And a flash of light and fire was all that could be seen in the sky. Naruto felt them increase their power, every one of them, fighting to their best extent that they could, brawling against one another. He found himself staring at a calm collected woman, whose demeanor was much unlike the others. Finally, he asked her something. Why are you attacking us? She took a moment to answer. Aizen-sama has ordered that we take you to him, so that you may be used in his army. What about the others? He asked once more, eyes narrowing. They do not matter. You are the only one we require. Naruto did not like that answer. He probably can't release any Suda-Sarasa or Burasudo thus, leaving his blunderbuss weapon in his cloak and, considering the village he was in would blame Konoha and war would ensue, and blah blah blah. But, he could release something else that he'd been saving. Naruto just had to wait for the right time. Arable would have frowned if, well, you know, but she was sure the slight glare she gave was good enough and decided that if this man was going to draw his blade against hers, then she only had one option to take course to. She drew her own sword, sparks kicking out when she did so. She held the hollow blade aloft and let her body take control, shutting down her mind and falling into instinct. She dashed forward, sword tucked across her abdomen. A static boom filled the air as she disappeared. Naruto's eyes widened but narrowed in a short time, sliding one foot back as the other snapped out the other way, twisting him in the air. In that same instant, his sword arm lashed out, preventing the Tresses leader from gnashing his side. Sparks snapped out from the collision, and both had a single moment as they stared into the other's eyes. And then it was gone, both combatants zipping about the air, clashing together with such force that thunder seemed to peal with each strike. The air whipped away and howled as if it were alive and being sliced as their swords crashed together. Naruto found himself smirking, finding this to be a good fight, but reminded himself that he was fighting for his girls, for the Cloud Village, fighting for his own life. An upswing dashed his saw cleaver away, a kick brought him to his knees, and finally, Harable's short sword pierced his side. Good. I will not kill you, but we will take you. Naruto's vision lapsed for a moment as he gurgled. In the back of his mind, he damned himself for not focusing, but knew that would get him nowhere, so he decided to finally release that move. Hacho Omimashita collapsed, retracting and wrapping itself around his arm. Harable was further surprised when he brought his hands together to form a box over his eye. Edo Saishin Kai. Harable was thrown back as a miasma of black exploded out from him, wrapping itself, binding itself to the form of the man it came from, making him larger, covering him with sticky tar that boiled and popped as it became like that of a large fox. The sound of lost souls cried out with gnashing teeth, as if to call forth the hand of a god to rip them from their master, but it was never so. For, the fox that formed from the familiars, it glared down at Tai Harable, as if about to devour her. And it opened its mouth, letting loose a hollow cry, thunder pealing at its lost soul-woven tongue. It was about to lunge, when suddenly a hail of kunai erupted from out of nowhere, a net full of explosive tags attached. Its large eyes widened as the net wrapped around it, but before they could go off, the very wave creating a haze of smoke, the beast seemed to liquefy, slipping through the net, and out the other side it went, covering Harable by accident. The explosion rocked the air, sending the beast right into Harable, just as it unraveled and receded back into Naruto. The blondes tumbled into one another, Naruto feeling something harder than ribs crack and burst beneath his chest. A cry of pain came from Harable, but he could do nothing as they fell. The ground, it was coming up fast, and it would most likely kill the woman. Now, the blonde Jinchuriki didn't rightly know what got in his head to do what he did, but did it nonetheless, despite the great pain he was going to feel. Grabbing something soft he couldn't tell at the time with one hand and wrapping her form with the other hand, he twisted round, moving her so that she was on top. And not a moment too soon, the ground unyielding as it was painful, breaking nearly every bone in his body, each piece snapping like twigs, the sound was chilling just as well, as if kettle corn were being popped all at once. His eyes were shut tightly, reeling from the feeling, his whole body in shock. It was so much that he decided to use a familiar up in recompense. He felt his bones snap back in place, sealing together once more. The gashes and cuts closed too, leaving him with naught but a scratch. This was when he opened his eyes. Harable was still atop him, her eyes were closed, but the collar to her jacket was ripped open. What was that strange, hard-looking thing on her face? It looked like a shark-tooth mask had covered most of her lower face, that is, until he crashed into her, shattering it in something lower to the point that only a few remnants remained on the very edges of her cheeks. Then, he realized that, because the mask was gone, her lips were exposed. By complete accident, they were kissing, or at least, they were as Naruto pulled back and away. Blood was in his mouth, he tasted the iron, but knew it was not his. Which, if the healing wounds and scratches to go by were anything, that would mean she had just become his familiar. Well, this complicates things. What? Naruto realized she was conscious, her eyes gleaming down on him with, well, not anger, nor confusion, both. Maybe. But he had no time to question, only to act. What are you? But the heft, he lifted Harable from her feet, holding her in his arms. He really hadn't expected to be helping her, but by the fact that those were shinobi weapons that nearly killed both of them, it would seem that the Raikage was not happy about intruders. So, out of the alley he went, using Shunpo, looking for the closest one of his girls he could find. Anko was surprised by the strange bracelets this girl pulled out of nowhere, them having jagged tips to them and all. But, what surprised her even more, as they fought on even grounds, was the giant beast that had appeared in the sky. But, she had little to fear, feeling that it was Naruto's presence, mixed with the fox's probably why it had that appearance. Though, shortly after, netting enveloped it, leaving a large explosion to rock the area. It was then that Anko nearly lost herself, ready to kill whoever did that, but felt his chakra once more as he zipped around. Then, out of nowhere, he was before both her and Itachi, his expression no longer that of a grin, nor was it sad. It just looked like he was really pissed. The others were with him, including the subordinates of the blonde woman in his arms. With them all together like that, he was about to suggest that they leave, but found himself frowning as the rush of feet and shouts surrounded them. All about them, encircling them, were shinobi of the Cloud Village, all drawing out their own weapons, ready to strike them. It was then that Naruto cursed his bad luck, realizing that even him and his girls, would be coupled with the four who attacked them. If he did anything to provoke them further, there would be hell to pay, war. That was the last thing he wanted, especially for Rangiku, Anko, Sui-Fong, and even QB. The sound of a flash step was barely heard as Orochi appeared, standing by Naruto with the rest, her arms raised in a stance. Got yourself into some trouble, I see. Not my fault, the people came out of nowhere and decided to fight us. You went into a fight without me. Kinda happened on the fly. Naruto heard her giggle a slight, nearly making him smile, but his scowl was still present, especially when the Raikage showed up, holding someone struggling by the hair. No, not just anyone, no, it was Samui. Why though? Why was he doing that to someone he obviously trusted? You come into my village after being invited and getting to roam around freely like a citizen, and yet this is how you treat me? No, I will not let you get away with this, you will pay, with blood. He tossed the struggling lass to his feet, her expression downcast even as Orochi helped her to her feet. She should have warned us of your attack, so I will personally have you all executed together. Suddenly, blue flames erupted from him, covering him, this thick chakra. He rushed forward with incredible speed, but before he could do anything, clones of Anko appeared. Not soon after, large snake summons came to their aid. A crash through the clones, poofing them with his fists, and continued, slugging one snake after the other. Everyone, get close. Naruto shouted, letting out his familiars, all of them, to surround them in one large black bowl of those he caught. Many were frightened by the piercing crimson red eyes of thousands of whatever it is made up that sphere. On the inside, Naruto turned around in the dark. Is there any way for you three to get us out of here? By the looks and feel of it, you guys have hollow powers. So, is there a way for us to get out the way you guys came in? He asked, hoping they wouldn't have to make a mad dash around an entire village of people raised to kill. The tall lion-like woman took a step forth. Yes, there is. She turned around, and suddenly, as if her mere presence was knocking on a door, the air ripped itself asunder, like a mouth opening. Out of that, they could see the dunes of white sand that forever seemed to go on evermore with the canvas of a bleak sky above. Alright then, let's. Wait. Before we go, I gotta do one thing. Apache interrupted Naruto. The latter asked the former what they meant. Just, can they hear us out there? The tomboyish girl let loose a grin that Naruto could say was an ornery one, and he liked it. Sure, he answered as someone thudded against the familiar wall. I will punch you. The faint voice of A was heard, making both Apache and Naruto grin madly. Going up to the wall's side, Apache yelled out for all to hear. This is my own private domicile. And I will not be harassed. She turned to Naruto, trying to conceal a laugh as they both shouted with a hearty bellow. Bitch. And with that, they leapt through the garganta, Naruto's familiars vanishing and returning with him as a dumbstruck army of shinobi stared on in disbelief. Behind them, the opening closed on A just before he could get to them. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.